Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Penn from thecreativepenn.com, and today I'm here with Bradley Metrock. Welcome, Bradley.
Hi Joanna, thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Oh, it's great to have you on the show. Just a little introduction. Bradley is the CEO of Score Publishing, which runs Digital Book World and the Alexa Conference, as well as the VoiceFirst.fm podcast network. He's also the host of This Week in Voice podcast, which discusses advance in voice technology, and I'm a listener, so I'm very excited. But Bradley, before we get into it, just tell us a bit more about you and how you got into publishing and voice tech in particular.
Sure. How much time you got?
A potted history.
I guess I'll start back in 2008. I started a completely unrelated business that was in the video game retail and entertainment space. And in 2013, I sold that business and wasn't able to rush into anything new. And I had always had an interest in publishing. During that video game business, I actually released a book that sort of was strategic to help that business. And I'd always been interested in publishing. I'd always been interested in this idea that the gatekeepers that used to control publishing are gone. And if they're not gone, then they're greatly diminished. And they're only in your way if you choose that to be the case. And so in the aftermath of selling that business, I started learning some new skills and picking up some things, that were related to publishing. I started learning Apple's publishing software, iBooks Author, which I found fascinating, and I still do. And used that to create some content, some interactive books, and then got engaged by some companies to do that. And one thing turned into another, and all of a sudden we're creating some interactive content now. And we have a new company now, and so we just called it Score Publishing. And so we were off and running. And as it turned out, a lot of these companies that we were working with to create interactive content, they started, these are forward-thinking, progressive, companies living on the frontier of tech. What is up with Alexa? What is the deal? What is the deal with voice in general? Should we be doing anything about it? I'm getting asked this. I said, well, shoot, why are you asking me? I don't know. But the more I found out about it and investigated it, the more intrigued I became. And at this point, we're into 2016, now, and even for 2017, we had sort of galvanized the community of people in companies using iBooks Author. We had been running an event called the iBooks Author Conference for some time, and that had grown in popularity. But we thought, why don't we have something called the Alexa Conference? Why don't we try it out and see if anyone shows up? And we were blown away by the people that showed up. And one of the people that showed up, one of the original speakers that we booked for that was HarperCollins. And HarperCollins, at that point, Alexa was brand new, but they were experimenting with, it wasn't even called a flash briefing at that point in time. And that's what they had managed to create. And they were one of the first speakers that we had. And we, despite no promotion, we had people traveling from overseas to attend. And so, hey, we thought maybe there's something to this. And so we continued to learn more about voice. We continued to grow the Alexa conference. We then, in 2017, started VoiceFirst.fm because I'd always wanted to start a podcast. And just the stupid way I do things, I said, why don't we just start a podcasting network? Doesn't that sound like a bright idea? And and it turned out to be a pretty good idea. But we're sometimes we take on, we bite off a little bit more than we can chew. But the result of it has been that we've had this incredible front row seat to this emerging technology that's changing the way every business works and the way every individual interacts with a computer, and the way our children and our grandchildren are growing up thinking about computers. their entire notion of what a computer is and does is different because of voice. And so I'm fascinated by it. We were along the way, with the growth of the iBooks Author Conference, we wanted to have a bigger publishing conference, something broader, something that spanned what we would later call the wide world of publishing. And we originally approached Tim O'Reilly, who we've had as a guest on Voice First FM and who we know, about acquiring Tools of Change, which used to be a big publishing conference. That was not possible. So then we went to F&W Media and we inquired about acquiring Digital Book World. And there's a whole interesting story to that, which is still, we still have a relationship with them. That's a good relationship, but we ended up being able to acquire that. We ended up being able to take it over, turn it around, and revitalize it and breathe new life into it. We've added a voice component, but we've also opened it up to everybody else, including self-published authors. We sit heading into 2019 at a pretty good place.
It is really interesting, and I love to hear you talk about this because I feel so often, I think many people feel that publishing and technology, have this slightly, like there's a time lag. And I mean, I wrote articles on the Future Book like 3 years ago about, some of this stuff and didn't really get, it was like no one was interested. And it's so, I just love to hear you talk about this stuff in this entrepreneurial, independent way, basically, and as an entrepreneur yourself with your own company. So I'm very excited, but many people listening are not as geeky as you and I about this type of stuff. So I wonder if many people will have heard of Alexa, but maybe you could just give us like a state of the nation. What is the kind of current state for voice tech, especially sort of with a slant towards authors and writers?
Sure. So this has been a long time in the making. Long before, even before I was born, this has been in the making, much less before I ever started paying attention to it. But the first step with this was computers had to be able to understand us at least as well as a human being can understand us. Because until you cross that threshold, a lot of stuff really doesn't make sense. In terms of investing in the technology. So, recently, in the last 5 years, give or take, a little bit more recent than that, according to some people, we have crossed that threshold to where, science tells us that human beings are capable and on average understand and comprehend about 95% of what another human being says to them. That's our throughput. That's our capability on average of understanding and recognizing speech. Computers now have gotten to where they are at above 99%. So Alexa is Amazon's voice assistant. Voice assistant is the phrase that's been given to these artificial intelligences, for lack of a better term, that receive your voice commands and then orient you in the right place. Right now, very strictly along the guidelines of what you say. If I say, I want to listen to the Creative Penn podcast, it's going to play it. It's going to play it now. Well, maybe so it's going to follow along strictly what I say. Now, really, we're rapidly approaching the point where this is far from the end. This is just the beginning. Really, what we're striving for is not just recognition of speech, but what we're striving for is understanding of intent. Maybe my intent was when I said play the Creative Penn podcast to play it at a low volume because I'm working on something else. Maybe my intent was play the most recent episode. because I'm caught up. Maybe my intent was I missed one episode 3 weeks ago, and that's the only one I've missed. Maybe my intent was something else. When computers, it's already happening with stuff like Google, and I mean it's controversial that computers understand us as well as they do, but once at some point there will be sort of an inflection point, and we will allow these voice assistants to have deep context on us. And so if I say play the podcast, I need to say nothing more for the computer, whatever voice assistant we're talking about, Alexa, Google Assistant, Siri, Microsoft's Cortana, Samsung's Bixby, whatever, will understand and just implicitly know that I've listened to these other ones. And what I'm really referring to is something I never even had to say. And that's where we're going. Now, how does that tie into publishing? Well, it ties into publishing in every way imaginable. If you're a self-publisher, or if you're anybody creating content, see, we really don't use the term self-publisher for digital book world. I like to use the phrase independent publisher.
So do I.
Yeah, because frankly, self-publisher, all you're doing is telegraphing that, you're a sole proprietorship, you're a one-man army. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Really, independent publisher captures it a little bit better, in our opinion, because, look at what you've done. You have a whole series of books. They're sitting on that shelf behind you. If you didn't know any better, you might be a 50-person company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what difference does it make? And so that's why independent publisher captures everybody without any of the stigma that still some like to associate with not being published by a major publisher with a book that shows up in Barnes & Noble or whatever. But for anybody publishing content, whether you're publishing fiction, nonfiction, whether you're publishing long-form articles to the internet, whether you're publishing audiobooks, podcasts, whether you're publishing videos to YouTube, or any other website, the day is almost here where, think about how you find a video now, or how you find content now, or someone learns about your book now. There's only so many ways that happens. Either another human being one human being tells another human being about your books, or Google tells another human being about your books, or social media tells another human being about your books, or there's a few other things. Of course, live events are a huge part of it. That's a big part of our business. There's some other things that sort of round out that pie chart. It's about to be completely rewritten because voice is about to step in. You're not going to, sooner than any of us think, and this is why Google is so worried and why Google Assistant is everything to them. They've seen Alexa and Siri and these other things. The days of you going to a browser and going to google.com, or just starting on your homepage or whatever by default, and typing something in as a query, and then having to understand the semantics of, well, do I put it in quotes? Do I need a minus? If I search for voice technology, am I going to get stuff related to the opera? How do I segregate out results? All that is going to go. And what you're going to be left with is computers that have all of your data, everything you've ever done, the purchase you made on Amazon yesterday, the purchase you made on Amazon 3 years ago, the podcast you listened to yesterday, the video you watched 3 years ago, the conference you went to a month ago, all the birthdays in your calendar, that meeting you missed 2 months ago, that email sequence with a friend that was 5 years ago, everything. And so the concept of discoverability, and I wrote a big article about this last year that was by far the most read thing that I wrote, and it was on digitalbookworld.com and got picked up some other places, is that um, how we discover books and how we discover new content in general will be filtered through this voice assistant. So soon, next year, 3 years, 5 years, doesn't really matter. You got to be thinking about it now. Um, I will say, Alexa, I have some vacation coming up next week, and I need a new book to read. What should I read? Oh, well, you know what? Um, there's a new book by that science fiction author whose book you read last year. That new book came out last month. You could read that. That podcast you just listened to 2 weeks ago in your car, that author has released 3 books in the last 2 years, one of which managed to on the New York Times bestseller list. That's an option. 4 years ago, when you went on your beach vacation, you read this book while you were sitting at the pool. You haven't touched that in a while. That's an option. Or we saw you Googling this stuff about starting a new business. There's a great new book that was featured in the news recently about entrepreneurship, and maybe that's of interest as well. There you go. Giving that sort of information, which is right around the corner, there's no more going to Google. And that information that I just regurgitated orally, screens are going to be part of this. This is not an audio only future. This is what we call a voice first future. So as opposed to interacting with computers primarily with the QWERTY keyboard or primarily with swiping and tapping on a glass screen on your mobile, the primary way that you'll look to interact with computers will be voice first, and then if that's not sufficient, then another interface second, and you'll have screens and visual stuff to go along with that the majority of the time. So, this age of voice assistants and these nascent AIs, which is what they are, it just should cause anyone creating content that they hope one day gets read. If you don't care, if you write something you don't care if it gets read, stop. I don't know why you're watching this. If you want someone to read it, then you have to care about how it's discovered, and it's changing right before your eyes right now.
Yeah, and I know some people listening will be kind of scared by this, possible future. And I agree with you. I think it's definitely the way it's going, especially in a time when people are saying they want to spend less time on screens. So, and I hear parents saying, oh, I don't mind how much time my kid spends with Alexa because it's reading them audiobooks or they're playing voice games or whatever. And it's like, oh, okay, this is interesting. But I wanted to ask you about this discoverability because several people have said to me they can't actually find this podcast on Alexa, and I have thus found that they should be using TuneIn or AnyPod, and I'm going to put links in the show notes as to how people can do it. But the discoverability on these devices right now does seem quite basic. Even with over 50,000 Alexa skills, it's still quite difficult. So thinking forward, 10 years ago I started putting blogs on Google, and now my site gets found. How do I start now to make sure I'm found? Is it Google snippets? Is it skills? What is it that we can start building so that we are found when people ask Alexa or Siri or whatever what they should read? If
you knew the answer to that,
be a millionaire.
You'd be pulling in more money than you already are pulling in. And if the truth is that if that answer were known, if I knew that answer right now, it really wouldn't be relevant for long, because it all changes so quickly. When I get asked that, the biggest thing you can do is you have to, I guess the way I would phrase it is you have to be comfortable with the tech giants. Now, Facebook is a different animal. Facebook is garbage, my opinion. They're not to be trusted. They haven't earned the right to participate in this voice landscape. and to have the data that is required to, to participate in the ways that I've described. They haven't earned it. It's a bad company. Amazon, the entire company was formed around a customer-centric model, to where they're all about the customer. You can argue, you don't like what they're doing, and that's fine. There is no argument that their entire existence and history is built around serving the customer. And that's from lowering price as much as possible, even to the point of breaking entire industries, making returns easy, all sorts of stuff. So that's a company that most people feel like you can trust. Now, we'll find out if we're wrong. Google, the verdict's out, but in general, the company had a slogan at some point, don't do evil or something.
Don't be evil, but that's not theirs anymore.
So we'll give them a shot. Apple tends to value privacy. They're having a lot of problems, but they tend to value privacy and data security. You have to get comfortable with these companies, because if you do not participate in their ecosystems, you will not be found. So the biggest things you can do is get over the problems you have with Amazon and get your books on Amazon. Period. End of sentence. Google, get over the problems you have with Google and pay close attention, because Google's making a lot of investments right now into the publishing space, and they're doing it kind of quietly. They're making huge investments into audiobooks. They have rolled out something called Talk to Books this past year, which I wrote another article about, which is a huge deal. They're doing, and then what they're doing with podcasts, they're investing heavily in that space. And keep in mind, podcasts are really nothing but an audiobook formatted a little bit differently. They're the sister of an audiobook. So you've got to get into both of these ecosystems. Apple is a little bit less important. You can get in there too if you want. That's probably a good idea too, because Siri is a little bit behind, but it looks like they're making the investments to catch up. The biggest thing you can do is get into these ecosystems and plant the flag, because what's happening is, like on the Google side, I assume that this podcast is available through Google Podcasts. I don't know. But if it weren't, you would want to be there, because Google is actively transcribing on their own, privately, telling no one, all podcasts that are in their ecosystem. And the reason they're doing it is because Google Assistant has to be able to parse that a little bit easier. And so they're doing it as a means of sort of bridging that gap with voice. There's a lot of these different things that these big players are doing on their own with the content that people have injected into their systems to prepare for the future. And while I can't tell you, here's what you need to do to be number one on Alexa, tell somebody, hey, tell me a great publishing podcast. How do we make sure that's the creative Penn? Even Amazon couldn't tell you that. But where you start is warming up to the beast and diving in, because that's, like it or not, that's either you're going to choose to play in the sandbox or you're not. And if you're not, hey, that's fine. You just need to have something else, and I don't know what something else is.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because my play with this is still content. So it really is more audiobooks, more podcast episodes, because I feel that our voice, the way we talk with podcasts, is very different to an audiobook. So if someone is asking one of these voice assistants for something, they're going to use the way we talk as opposed to the way we would type. So I think podcasting, audiobooks, transcripts of things should, in inverted commas, play into the way this voice search works. I also read that Google's using snippets quite a lot to answer specific questions. So doing, making sure you have a snippet plugin for, your website, that type of thing. These are not hard and fast tips, I guess, but, any thoughts particularly on audiobooks? Because many authors are thinking about that too.
Yeah, I think, first of all, an audiobook should exist. I mean, let's just start with that. If you're going to the trouble of writing that science fiction epic that you've been wanting to write your whole life, or your memoirs, or a how-to on carpentry, or whatever it is that you want to write. Because as you know, I know everyone's got a book in them.
Mm-hmm.
And it wants to come out. And we're so fortunate to live in an age where it can. If you're going to invest that time and the money and the mental bandwidth, and you're going to make the sacrifices necessary to bring your book to life, it is unfathomable that you wouldn't go further and release an audiobook for it. Maybe in the past there was a question about that. That question's gone. I mean, and you can narrate it yourself. A Digital Book World, we had some great vendors there who do a fantastic job providing the tools necessary to play in this sandbox. Find a Way and Find a Way Voices is a big one. Mm-hmm. We just used them to release our own audiobook, which was our compilation of snippets and blur excerpts from our podcast. But whether it's yourself narrating or somebody else, you got to make that happen. That's number one. So assuming that you've gotten to that point, then you've got some interesting options. And I love the idea of taking an audiobook. There's an argument on whether you would want to fully transcribe. A lot of people narrate audiobooks and they sort of riff over the top of it.
Mm.
It's not a verbatim reading. It's a reading plus. There's extra content in there. And
most with nonfiction, I don't know if that would ever happen with fiction, because that's
You're right. Nonfiction, yeah. And so you could take perhaps a transcription of that and put it somewhere on the internet. But I think what's more interesting is finding a way, and there's a few different ways to do it, but finding a way to take an audio excerpt of that audiobook and then either append it to the end of a podcast that you create yourself, or append it to the end of someone else's podcast, or, another thing that's coming real soon is vastly superior monetization of podcasts, because that industry is evolving very rapidly. I think one thing we're going to see people do is serialize audiobook content across podcasts, across podcast distribution vehicles. So, and you're already seeing it a little bit with companies like Serial Box. You know that company?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, when I came into one of the reasons I started podcasting 10 years ago was Podiobooks, which was podcasting audiobooks. And that's how I found a lot of people. So that type of stuff has been around for 10 years, but of course it wasn't mainstream because we didn't have the smartphones. So it's like you said earlier, this stuff has been around. It just hasn't gone mainstream because the tech hasn't been there. But I do want to ask you on audiobooks as well about the narration, because we've been talking about us speaking to the AI and the AI doing stuff, but what about AI synth? Like, I've been looking at voice synth stuff where I have enough of my voice around now that a voice synth should be able to take and do my voice, and they've done it with Trump and Obama and all of that. What do you think about the AI narration possibly taking over from human narration when it comes to audiobooks, but also even like replacing you and I on our podcasts or something?
And people just don't realize it. So we've got the Alexa conference coming up in 2 weeks here in the United States, and so this is, this type of thing is top of mind. You referenced, Trump and Obama. I think what you're referencing, there's a company called Lyrebird.ai, and for people who haven't checked this out, they should. It's lyre like an instrument, LYREBIRD.ai, and that company, they're far from the only one, but they're at the forefront of creating, I guess I would call it emulation technology. And the way their technology works is that they can, and I believe I'm regurgitating this correctly. They probably improved it since I've looked at it because it's moving quickly, but they can take 45 to 60 seconds of you speaking. Any snippet of this. You don't have to be reading something specific with different phonemes. You can be saying anything for across 45 to 60 seconds with the way their tech works. And with that, they will reproduce your voice to such accuracy that most people will not be able to tell the difference. And this is already being used. This technology made an appearance first in music studios. So you've got traveling musicians, rappers or whoever, and they'll be on tour, and they'll want to hit the studio. So after they play one night, this happens in Nashville all the time. They'll play a show, and then at 2 a.m, they'll go to Music Row and hit up a studio, and they'll record. And then they'll be out the door to the next city at 7 a.m. or whatever. Now, in that scenario and almost any other, if an audio engineer is capturing that, and then after the fact they realize, oh, shoot, we didn't get this, or there was a problem with this audio, or we need something else, the rapper's not coming back to town for another 6 months. So what are you going to do? I don't know what you're going to do. But now you don't have to worry about it because they have technology that can take it the rest of the way. And it's being used now. Now it's being used more and more by the same studios, the same audio engineers, but in the trade/big publishing audiobook production process. So Hillary Clinton, good example. She narrated her whole audiobook. And, her time, like so many other people's, is valuable. She can sit there and she can read it. And she's old also, by the way. So, she can sit there and read her book. But when you're producing it and you're editing it, if you realize, wait a minute, those words could have been enunciated a little bit clearly. Wait a minute, there was a problem, the computer didn't save this right, or wait a minute, whatever. Now you can use technology to prevent her from having to come back into the studio and just sort of emulating her speech in a way that no one would ever know.
I'm super excited about this. I mean, one of my ideas around this is around licensing of voice and voice branding. A lot of people have asked me to narrate audiobooks, and I'm like, you can't pay me enough, to be honest. It's hard enough to narrate my own. But it's, something that I think, a narrator can sell audiobooks beyond the author sometimes now. Like, people really, my husband loves Stephen Fry, the British actor Stephen Fry. His voice is a brand. So, sure. I mean, this type of licensing and voice branding, which is again why, and you have, I think, quite a distinctive voice, and clearly I do now after years of doing audio, and people hear it and they recognize you. So do you think this kind of voice branding, voice licensing would be something? Oh, yeah. And if you,
Yeah, for sure. Already people are inquiring about stuff like this, like a Morgan Freeman, or, people with uh, recognizable, like voices on the celebrity scale. And it's possible that there's been some sort of transaction that sort of has set a price for it, but if there has been one, I'm not aware of it. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how these roads converge, because we're there. We're at the point where a Stephen Fry, Morgan Freeman, a whoever can have their voice, can basically sell their voice as if they were selling a font on the computer, and that's
it's kind of scary because authors have moral rights to their work, and don't want it to be used in a way that reflects badly on them. And, you can see the problems with this, but it's still exciting. But you brought up there, you said we're there already. But I feel like one of the big things on the horizon is 5G, which is, 2020, probably 2021. And then looking at the global sense, it will kind of be rolling out. So from what I understand about 5G, it's going to be a step change in technology. So do you see that there'll be an even bigger tipping point with a sort of 5G? And what are you looking forward to then?
Oh, yeah. 5G is very important. And the continued evolution of that kind of infrastructure. It impacts voice, just to start there, in reducing the latency of sort of the voice transaction. You ask Alexa something, and it's going to take a couple of seconds to parse that and receive it back, and there are obvious implications for reducing that time, but then there's very not obvious and very unintuitive implications for reducing that time as well. And it will just allow that type of computing to flourish even more. But it will also have a great impact on things like autonomous cars. That's just another good example, where you pretty much have to have technology that performs a little bit better than what we've got right now for the data throughput necessary for cars not to be running into each other all over the road, if something goes wrong or whatever. So, there's several examples of about how it's going to impact our life, but I'm bullish on it as well. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, and even autonomous cars, people won't necessarily look at screens, they will probably be listening more. So autonomous cars means more people listening.
Autonomous cars will be the best thing for self-publishers that has ever happened in the world. This is not a joke.
Tell us why.
I'm going to. So think of all the time that drivers, spend driving. Think about all the time that goes into the daily commute to and from. All the time where if a family's on vacation, you have 2/3, 3/4, 4/5 of the family able to do things and not the whole family together. When you have autonomous vehicles and no one's really sure when they're coming, although, again, that's going to be sooner than people, 10 to 20 years is what people say. You're going to see it sooner. For people creating content, when you open up the ability for people to buy content and consume content with not just their recreational time, but with their corporate time that they're spending traveling somewhere, and time that people are on the road, you change everything. You change everything. Because think about how many more books you would read or I would read if we could read them in the car. And yes, you can play an audiobook in the car while you drive. Yes, that's absolutely true. but can you really be deeply engaged in the car or whatever? And then the fact that you are having to drive to and from work, it just shapes the whole rest of your day. It's I'm not the best at articulating it, but what I can tell you is that I'm a big believer in the fact that when you combine voice assistants and all the stuff that I talked about to begin the show, and this computer that understands you, that reduces the friction of you discovering new content that you're going to like. You combine that with this incredible new blue ocean of free time. You're going to get demand for content and willingness to pay for content because people have more time to consume it now than you've ever had before. It's exciting. And that's a whole other rat's nest of topics, but I am a big believer in that as well, and it will impact us during our lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. And you and I, as I said at the beginning, we geek out on this kind of stuff. So just tell people, because we are out of time, there's so much we could talk about. So, we'll have to do it again sometime. But tell people where they can find out more, what else you've got going on, where should they go to find out more about the Voice First and also Digital Book World.
I appreciate that, and thank you so much for having me on the show, by the way. If you want to learn more about what we do, if voice intrigues you, if anything on this show intrigues you, I would start with going to www.voicefirstevents.com. That is our portfolio of events that we do currently just within the United States. That's soon to change, and there will be some overseas popping in there. But Digital Book World's part of that portfolio. Digital Book World 2019, for anyone listening to the show or watching the show, would be, in our opinion, the best way, the best conference you could attend if you're going to attend one, because you will not only extend your network vastly, but you will open your eyes to all the different ways to leverage technology in the short term that will maximize all the hard work, the blood, sweat, and tears you put into writing whatever it is you've written.
Fantastic. And just tell people about your podcast as well.
So I host a show called This Week in Voice. I host a couple of different shows, but This Week in Voice is our flagship show. thisweekinvoice.com. You can learn more about it there, or search on your favorite podcast provider. And we're in season 3 of the show now. It's a great place to get and stay current with what's going on in voice technology. We have a great panel of guests every week on the show while we're in season. If you go to voicefirst.fm, you will see all sorts of content hosted within our family of podcasts, within our network, stuff like Voice Marketing out in LA, VUX World, which is hosted out of London, Alexa in Canada, which is hosted out of Vancouver. We're fortunate to have a great group of folks producing content that is in the realm of voice, that has something to do with voice at least. And that's a good place to check out, too, if you're interested in learning more. Brilliant.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Bradley. That was just fascinating.
Joanna, what you're doing is great. You're killing it. You've done such a good job creating your business, your platform for yourself. I'm honored that you invited me to be part of it.